on October 25 of the year 2007, and we're in our little mini studio here on 36th Street, and we've just watched the program with Paula Gloria when she was in California, and she's now in this studio, and we're racing the clock. We've got to do some programming at MNN today, but we're here talking with her, and we're going to pick up from what we were talking about then, and we're recording it. We were going to try and put some programming out to the stream, but we haven't been able to get that together yet. But Paula, welcome very, very much to Conversations, and see if we can get her to come up to the switcher. There we go. Here's Paula, and Paula, say hello to the audience and so forth.
Hello, everybody at MNN and eventually out on YouTube. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here. I think that this is an accomplishment of many lifetimes.
Could we be, yeah.
And as you say, Harold, we have to think 1 year out.
Well, as I said,
we had problems with the stream,
yeah,
and I'm not sure exactly why, but I feel if each of us do the best we can with the resources that we have, eventually we'll all make the connection.
Yeah,
that's
right.
kind of my intuition.
Well, this is the day. This is, in a certain sense, a memorable day because you've been working right out on the leading edge of pushing the envelope, as they say, by getting in touch with John Kowalski, who I had done a program with a week or so ago. Yeah,
Wonderful program, Harold.
Well, it was interesting.
Program.
John understands the possibilities of the emerging technological capabilities of getting communication going out and so forth. And you had taken advantage of his knowledge, and you two had worked together and put together a situation for a month or so. Maybe it's worth talking about, where you have been, after your program, further down the rabbit hole, rabbitholecentral.tv, that airs on MNN 11:30 to noon, you pick up a stream and you can have a connection going out to the world. And maybe it's worthwhile talking about that. Maybe talk about Down the Rabbit Hole, and then talk about the fact that you've been streaming, I guess, for about a month or so, and pushing that envelope, because that's one of the aspects of communications that is emerging that is important, particularly so, if I may, to the public access community, which are not big institutionally connected people so much, but are individuals. But talk a little bit about, maybe a little bit of yourself and about the Rabbit Hole Central.
Well, I've had the honor to be a guest on Harold's show many times, and I've also had the honor to, you know, kind of investigate other producers' work. And what fascinates me is what keeps people going to follow an inspiration beyond our reward-punishment system. That, in other words, from what keeps people inspired to produce shows when they're not being paid for it. And it seems this is a model that's worth understanding, because so often, so many of the problems that we have, people say, oh, human nature's greedy, and oh, you have to pay, and I can't do it unless I'm paid, and there's no money in it. And then people wind up depressed, and they don't do anything except passively watch entertainment. So what excited me about the idea of doing rabbitholecentral.tv to come after my show is I wanted to be available for any, even abuse. Even abuse would be feedback. To say, I think your show, you know, Margaret's laughing there over the switcher, but see, I love that. You know, it's like feedback. And so you kind of know that a connection's being made, and either the person that says, you know, you're full of it and it's a crazy idea will convince you, you're going to give them the platform, or you can convince them. But in any case, for having been available for that feedback, whatever you're trying to create, whatever your message is going to be greater because of that feedback.
Yeah, and that thing you said about people being reward and punishment, that's a big paradigm shift. Why would anybody do anything if they weren't going to get something for it? That's like you could take that as a profit motive, or you could take it as an ethos that informs virtually all of our historically inherited institutions, and people, the masses of the people, are caught up in a situation of, I got to do what these people who represent these power structures that exist out of history tell me I have to do, or else I'm not going to be able to have any food to eat or anything. So it's a situation where people are not in any kind of a way liberated in terms of their own situation, and that may be the promise of the future that's emerging, and that's why so many people interested in trying to create a world where the human values that really matter, love and all these kind of things, are not a negotiated thing by everybody in a
Right.
business sense, and that's a
Right.
different kind of world
How
than
could-
what history has presented.
Right,
Yeah.
and after all, how could love be negotiated? Like, if the first commandment is to love God, how can you be commanded to love, and how could that be really love?
Well, they make
if
it a
you're,
deal.
If you're doing it,
You're going to make a deal. You're going to make a deal. I'm going to do it. If I give you enough coconuts, will you do what I say you should do? Or if you don't have the right to eat, or you're not going to let your children be able to eat, if you don't do what I tell you, then you see
Right.
it's a different kind of world than
but,
if somebody's got
that's- yeah.
availability to them of what they need in order, or even want reasonably. And that may be the world that's emerging, a post-scarcity ontologic reality, which is a big transformation.
Well, you know, that's one of my favorite topics, because I think that the quintessential deal that was ever made in the awareness of our society, Judeo-Christian, and even Islamic, is the deal that Abraham made with God.
Yeah.
And that's something that this entertainment-oriented society doesn't like to consider that much.
No.
Because it's painful. It's a painful consideration.
What did Abraham say?
What did Abraham say? Oh, you don't know what Abraham... Okay, well, I should... Abraham was... I guess he was getting towards the end of his life. And Sarah, his first wife, had never conceived a child. And he had a child by another wife.
Hagar, I think.
Yeah, and there was a lot of problems with that because Sarah got jealous, I think, turned her out, and she wandered around on the desert. So his firstborn was actually from, you know, the other woman. What was her name?
Sarah, I think.
No,
was
not
it? No,
Sarah.
Sarah?
No,
not
Hagar.
Mm.
And so that's why the original gripe that the Muslims have is that they're descended from the true first son, because in these cultures the first son is supposed to have the ability and the charge, and some have said, I mean, Alan Steinfeld,
Yeah.
talking from Chinese medicine, says the greatest vitality that's passed on is passed on to the first child. So if the first child came from this woman, and if Abraham sacrificed his second child from Sarah, then they would say, well, we're the true descendants of Abraham because you sacrificed your son Isaac. So there's different interpretations. Obviously, most of the Jews today would claim that he didn't really sacrifice Isaac, that at the very last minute, the sword was taken out of his hand by an angel, so that means you're believing in the supernatural. Or he decided, he saw a ram and he switched it and he got the message from God, but that's still supernatural communication. He got the message from God that he should sacrifice the ram instead. This is so profound and deep, and I know when I was in India at the time of Eid, which is the time that the Muslims recognize this event, and they sacrifice a lamb, a goat, or something like that. And I was watching the most beautiful calico goat being looked at undoubtedly by his owner with such love. It was tremendous to see the love that this man had for this beautiful, beautiful goat. And you knew this was the time of Eid, and you knew what was going to be happening. And the poignancy of the event, I can't even begin to describe to you.
We should get that story across to the Roar people.
Well, it's so profound.
Animal rights.
And I would sometimes talk to the Muslim leaders. I can't remember what they call them, that would be sitting in these dargahs. And I had just read René Girard's Violence and the Sacred. And I said, the Western world does not understand the sacrifice of Abraham and Eid and what it's about. And he said he knew, and these were people who were kind of always checking me out, because I was always on shaky ground. You know, part of them was really intrigued because I was a Westerner, and there was a hope that I could be kind of a messenger to sort of bring back a feeling of peace, and that there shouldn't be this horrible division and horror, because we've definitely made the Muslim the bad guy. The Osama bin Laden cave and so on, and there's such...
It's the bête noire du jour, is the Muslims. It's shifted back and forth over time at the convenience of the power structures that exist.
Yeah, so, and I mean, people can claim that Abraham made his son the scapegoat, and you can't even consider what you know, it's just unthinkable. But the nature of my show, farther down the rabbit hole, I try to go into the unthinkable. And right now, Nico Haupt has been taking over my show while I was gone.
Yeah, he did a good job, yeah.
Thank you, Harold. He did a good job.
You were in San Francisco visiting your dad.
Yes,
yeah,
and I
right.
think in very large part thanks to the energy you put into it, because you've always talked about scarcity being transcended and our technological precipice that we're on to destroy all of humanity. And Nico is his soul is crying out, please understand these weapons. But one of the most controversial aspects of 9/11 truth is a TV fakery. And the computer-generated images that we're seeing on TV, and the people that are calling it to the public's attention are people who have nothing to lose. They're not worried about losing their jobs, perhaps because they're already homeless or jobless. But they, at one time, were working on computer graphics, and they understand what was presented on mainstream. And because of this, the majority of people in 9/11 truth say, oh, people can't handle it. Just like they can't handle the sacrifice of Abraham, you know, they feel the public cannot handle what really happened on 9/11. This is the 9/11 truth. People have limitations of what they'll talk about. And so that's the heartbreak that exists. And just like that man who looked at his goat, there's many things that I and others who I've grown to respect have enormous heartbreak over.
Yeah. Well, if they're going to have a hard time handling that, they're going to have a very difficult. I remember, I think cast back, when Galileo presented to the world, or Copernicus, the idea that the Earth was not the center of the universe, which had been intrinsic to all the, you know, cosmology and the thinking and the means by which people got a sense of identity. Hieronymus Bosch came up with all those paintings that depicted such deep anxiety and angst and so forth that caused. And when you have a paradigm shift or a qualitative transformation in the situation from the means by which people get an identity, it really is upsetting. Partly because you had all these institutions that have formed within one context, and then the understanding brings a different context that is qualitatively different than what everybody had been getting their identity from. And so I would submit that you have a much even larger one, in a certain sense, if this idea that was put forth, as I would say, by Bucky Fuller, who was a comprehensive thinker, and there were others, there were many others, it's been put forth, you know, Murray Bookchin, a lot of other people, that we may...
Can I interrupt you just for a second?
If you want, sure, go ahead.
Just because I want to make sure people are understanding this point. In other words, it's not going to look like what we think, because it's if they said that the Earth is not the center of the universe, and Hieronymus Bosch was
a painter, yeah.
A painter was depicting the great angst
that created.
That created.
Yeah.
At that time, this was a very painful process.
Absolutely.
This was not just the church holding out. This was people in
general.
The church were in shock.
Yeah, the church. You have church and you have political institutions. You have all your institutions formulated within a certain context of understanding, and then those are torn asunder by a new reality that's emerging.
Yeah,
Alan talks about new realities.
Right,
and
I know,
so forth,
and you used to say it's not going to look like what we think, and I used to think, what does Harold mean by that? Because how can I even imagine what I can't even imagine?
Well, yeah, it's that, and you can go back through all of evolution and so forth to a series of singularities, things that appeared. We, the Homo sapien species, were contained 4 or 5 million years ago. We did not exist as a species. You have an evolutionary process. We were contained within what they called the Australopithecine, a line up the hominoid line, and then there became Homo habilis. And then about 200,000 years ago, humanity appeared with a new reflective consciousness and so forth. And we may actually be coming to the end of the situation that we've been in throughout 200,000 years of human experience due to our technological extension of consciousness and creating an environment different than what we emerged out of. So it's like leaving the womb. And a larger thing even than the geocentric, heliocentric transformation that occurred is, from my way of thinking, is the fact that, put forth by Fuller and others, that the idea of material scarcity, that there is not enough, that was the condition in which everything occurred. I think most of the time we were wandering around. 200,000 years ago we appeared out of Africa. and we were wandering around picking up carrion or doing whatever we could to eat. It was a very hard scrabble. It was very difficult. There obviously wasn't enough. And then we evolve and we evolve. We get to the point now with the technological success, we may have transcended the ironclad laws of scarcity itself, which is a qualitative transformation, that there is enough with the elegance of design and the technologically augmented capability of providing for humanity, all of humanity, rather than a favored few, which has been the case most of the political systems came up with, identifying themselves as the deserving few, I noticed, the emperors of Rome and so forth. But then we do that, and then that would also relate not only to the humanities lot, the 80% are not well served by the institutions we've inherited, and so it's a qualitative transformation that is the challenge that faces us now. And I'm upset because the idea that we may have actually created a qualitatively different situation of transcending scarcity is never mentioned. It would be the largest paradigm shift in the history of evolution of biological processes on this planet if that were the case. It's been advanced by some, modeling and so forth, and it's never bothered to be mentioned because it's assumed to be ipso facto absurd that there can be a situation where there is enough as an ontologic reality, and it's never mentioned. So we may be overlooking the major paradigm shift in the history of the evolution of consciousness, and it's bothersome because that may be the way that would prevent us from destroying the whole species, which on the negative side we now have the capability of doing with our weapon systems that have become so sophisticated. So that's a large paradigm shift. It would be nice if it were just sometimes mentioned by somebody rather than just assumed to be absurd.
I'm going to tell you what you've told me about that, is to be kind to yourself and gentle to yourself, because
to ourselves as a species,
to ourselves,
yeah, because
this,
the transformation,
this bothersomeness that you're talking about, or this being upset, there really is no one to be upset at or to be bothered at, because they are just as locked as we are, those few on the top.
Yeah.
It's the way the whole entire paradigm shifts.
Well,
and
yes, I would see that as a possibility, because we've had a dialectic. You can go to Marx, or you can go to any understandings of political economy or evolution of sociological, or, you know, and it's always been a question of you get one group who's in control, and they convince everyone that in order for us to have the grain, we got to go rob it from the other people for our tribe to be better, and so forth, and all these differentiations. And all of our institutions are built into authoritarian structures where they corral the masses to do what a few people understand is necessary for them to benefit. And they call that the advancement of civilization and so forth. So you have all of those, and it's always within a context where there's not nearly enough, never can be enough, and then they get assumptions of human nature, as you said, that human nature, it's absurd to even think about it, because human nature, everybody can understand, is just inherently greedy and will have to get for theirs. And you have to protect your kids against women figuring which child they're going to let starve to death. And when we know there's enough, it's a different thing if there is enough. It creates a different context within in which institutions can be formulated, and it's never mentioned. That it is never mentioned as a possibility is upsetting to me, whereas I think it should be 10 feet high on every think tank in the world. We have possibly, how do we model it? Is it possible that we've transcended scarcity, and that's a reality in which our institutions could be reformulated, and the technology is making it possible for us to go down that pathway, which may be the thing that'll lead us to coming into the contact with consciousness at a fulfilled, transcendent level to what we've been throughout all of human experience. It's a little hard for people to get a hold of that.
That's why you have to say it over and over again, and work with different
Been doing
people.
it for about 35 years, and it never is understood or
well, I think it's starting to be understood.
You think so?
I think so, and I think from all levels. It's like I just posted a few videos on YouTube.
Yes, you've posted many. How many have you got up now?
Well, I've got 311 up now.
Very good.
But what I'm trying to do is show both sides, and I feel I'm privileged, and I feel that's kind of my Greek background coming out, because the Greeks were shippers. They would bring goods from one shore to another, and also share knowledge from one shore to another. Alexander the Great made it into India.
Yeah, Bactria.
And so I think it's very natural with my background that I would be so excited about being in the YouTube environment where you're getting comments from the viewers.
No way that
you're going back and
Right.
forth, you know, that it's not just one blah, blah, blah from one side,
or
the
from
other,
a power
or the
structure.
Other, or the other, where,
yeah.
where you're kind of a slave to consumers who only want to be entertained, and as long as they buy things, you know, you're going to survive because your sponsors are going to keep you there. You know, both ways have to be checked. But I'm also have had the privilege to encounter some very wealthy people who I honestly think want just as much to do the right thing as those who are homeless. As you, people may not realize, but we've had guests on our shows that are homeless today.
Yeah.
They're homeless here in New York, and you don't talk about it. You would be surprised at the number of people that you don't even know. They go through great efforts to take their showers and things that are homeless, because they know once it's known, there's, you know, such a stigma against it, and then they'll never have a chance to get a job. And they're making heroic efforts to keep connected with us. So I think it's about reaching out, taking a risk with the other side, whether you're rich or poor. Like I just posted one today, and I got a comment, I will never consider the fox hunt, you know, and I don't like this person, and I said, well, did you watch the video, you know? And I'm not sure what they answered, and I said, well, how about this? What did you think about the Howard Stern material? Because I got some private video about some outrageous stunt that happened on Howard Stern.
Yeah, you mentioned it to
and
me.
I tried to follow through with that. So everyone has their cup of tea, but in general, I try to do the kind of shows that will get people to actually turn off the TV, go out, spend more quality time with their family, their loved ones, be more enthusiastic about their jobs, and not feel despair and that it's hopeless, because I don't think it is.
Well, I hope not, because hopeless is reached new dimensions now, where apparently, again, it's modeling. There are things that it's hard to do it, but modeling on the negative side can only be modeling. There's no way it can be tested. We could test the dreadnought, or we could test the tank, or we got the bow and arrow, and then we got this, you know, the tools and the weaponry that people have fought with, and the power structures have tried to best one another.
But we can't test global annihilation.
We cannot test that now, because it is, since about 1970, the weapon systems are so Promethean, apparently, that if they're to be set off, and they're developing new technologies, and there's all this arms race and everything going on, the ancient hatreds and so forth are coming to the fore. If it were to be done, apparently, it would mean not the end of the tribe in the other village or the other nation, as been the case out of history, but the end of our whole species, the whole hominoid line, apparently. That would be another thing that would be well to test. Is that in fact the case? And what does it mean, and what are the ways in which things, what's it all about, and that sort of thing. And we live at a very qualitatively different time, and so people are interested in trying to communicate that. You started talking, why would anybody do something if there wasn't something in it for themselves? You know, that kind of thing. That's been imbued as part of the, human nature and so forth. But there are people concerned with things comprehensively. And there's no way, like the YouTube or all the capabilities, or your streaming now, that could never have happened 10 years ago. It couldn't have happened 5 years ago. It can only happen now.
To be the devil's advocate on my own shtick here, last weekend I had 10,000 hits while I was in Pennsylvania. And I'm just sweating bullets trying to figure out how to make this work. Now, if each viewer gave me 10 cents, I could pay my rent and everything's fine. But they aren't. I haven't figured out how to set it up, because if 10,000 viewers watched my shows, I'm not saying that they wouldn't give the money if they could. This is my responsibility. I haven't figured out a way to make it happen. But if my stuff isn't worth 10 cents, I wish they'd shut it off and go out and be with their families and be in nature and work at develop some job that, or you don't, I know you don't like the word job, but do something more constructive than just passively taking it in and taking it in. And I told Molly, when I was going through my grieving process to try to figure out how to make this happen, I said, I got one viewer who made that comment, don't listen to anybody else, and beware of Paula Gloria, because this is just her opinion, and you have to live your life. And I answered back and I said, I agree with you. And then he answered back and he said, I know. I listened to what you're saying. So if bandwidth becomes expensive or people have to pay for it, then you have to resolve it and figure out a way.
But the promise is, or one of the promises is that bandwidth is not going to become more expensive. It's going to become free. It's going to become abundant. It's going to become overwhelmingly abundant. And you see, you're dealing in that kind of that's a metaphor for non-scarcity, because a value is given to things when it's scarce. If something is scarce, it has more value. And so and the idea of scarcity, in fact, economics, which is important, we don't have an Einstein of economics. We don't have a qualitative, transformative vision of economics, whether some people would refer to Karl Marx or a socialist notion. They think the private sector is inherently bad. Naomi Klein, I think, is really a scholar. She's got the book out now about democracy, and she questions the economic paradigm and so forth. But economics is, let me just finish in a second. Economics is defined in many textbooks and so forth, the allocation of scarce resources. Now, if you have a situation where it is not scarce, if something is not scarce, then its value will go to zero.
Right.
So that is something that cannot be allowed for any of your economic, and the economic theory informs all politics and the political structures and the sociological structures. So we need an economics that relates people to the way things are being produced, other than the traditional labor theory of value.
I'm excited about what you're saying, but what I'm saying, and what I love about dialoguing with you and exploring with you on these things, it has to emerge from both sides.
Yeah.
If my viewers must value their time. They must say, there's, like this one viewer who left that comment, there has to be a point where you don't become addicted to Paula Gloria's programming. I've had people say, I had a low day, I was depressed, thank God I can turn you on, you cheer me up. But what I want to do is get them off of watching me. Just like when I had my holistic dentistry show, I was told people liked my voice and they like to listen to it to go to sleep. And I told Webster Tarplin, Webster, who really knows Manhattan history, he said, you know, that's true. There used to be somebody, and he knew the name, and I should have written it down because I'm always interested in Manhattan history. I love Manhattan. But he said there was some lady that was selling mattresses, and she had the kind of voice that was soothing, and it was pushing mattresses.
Right.
And so I thought,
oh, they know what they're doing.
Yeah, so I thought, God, though, you know, and I think this is probably why my soul had to push on, and why I spent 4 tough years in India.
Yeah.
And because I didn't want to put people to sleep. So that's why I'm saying the new paradigm is going to emerge through people kind of buttressing up against the painful, or what might cause grief, for at least a bit, to look at things that they don't want to look at, because like you say, it's not going to look like what we think. So I think both rich and poor, those who are cruising off of YouTube right now because it's free, and those who are racking their brains trying to figure out how to control all this abundant bandwidth as they are, because
or how to monetize it, to get money from it.
But
for their own purposes.
If everybody on all levels are trying to think of monetizing it, we're all culprits, or you know, devils of the same situation. I mean, somebody said, oh, I want to get hits, and somebody's video got $29,000, but it produced 5 million hits. And my question was, being of Greek mentality, which is why I'm interested in the Armenian bandwidth person later on today, is what did 5 million hits produce for whoever was selling that product? That's where my attention's going. I don't want to be producing the video that's getting 5 million hits. I want to go into the guts of that and find out, how is that creating a better society? And I think we can do it. I think we have within our circle, John Kowalski and others, who are helping each other. You know, we come over, and like Victor Taplin said, we run this operation on spit. But we can you know, put our heads together and create something that has heart and soul and content. Because content will always be king.
Yeah, well, content will be king. And the thing is, though, that all the things that matter the most, love. And the really important human aspects of an enlightened consciousness does not fit into the bargaining that goes
Right.
into the marketplace.
You can't bargain
It's
for
like
love,
a
or it's
different
not
kind
love.
of consciousness.
Right.
And if somebody they're relating not because of how they can use somebody or how they can benefit from them or all these kind of things that work into a market fundamentalism. I think Naomi Klein has written this book on democracy. Is really worth reading because she sees things, and she does say, unlike a lot of what the progressive community does, tends to be just vehemently opposed to the idea of the private sector at all. She
Right.
says we need a mixed economy, and we need a situation where you have a private sector and a public sector, and you need to have, and the fact that the technological instruments are increasingly responsible for production, and they're all owned by a very small group of people, whereas most of the people have only a labor relationship or a job in order to get income to pay the rent and do
Right.
the things they have to do. They are beholden, just as surely as a serf on an ancient feudal estate was beholden to the land the owner who owned that. They are beholden to the people who own the capital assets, and those all accumulate more and more in fewer and fewer hands and wealthier and wealthier people. And they're going to have to democratize ownership as an instrument of capital formation, the way the capital is to be formed, or the capital accumulation, the technological capability with good design, but also as an instrument of income distribution, because people being slaves within a system like picking cotton when a cotton machine can do it is not it, but holding with what the future requires. That would liberate them from having to be concerned with the things they have to do, beholden to the people who own the assets that are responsible for production, and would free them to be having what they call a competence and ability to live without having to answer to people in terms of having a job that fulfills a productive function, the way the rationale is presented, particularly by the market fundamentalists. Naomi Klein's really worth listening to, yeah.
Yeah. Are you going to have her as a guest? on
I
your
would
show?
like to. I'm not sure
Yeah.
they can understand where I'm coming from, because I
Well,
do
you
not support a book that says the
persist.
Capitalist Manifesto. I present as a model that really is really responsible, one written and co-authored by Mortimer Adler and Louis Kelso, and it's called, instead of the Communist Manifesto, which would like to do away with the bad guys who own the assets and the Capitalist Manifesto. So when they see that you think a book called The Capitalist Manifesto is relevant to meeting the needs and so forth, you've turned off so much of what is called the progressive community, which traditionally, God bless them, have been concerned with the least among us, whereas most of the people on the capitalist end of things are have gotten to where they are by being concerned with feathering their own nest.
Well, keep persisting, Harold. Really,
Well-
keep persisting, because, you know, I've studied you so carefully.
Oh boy,
And-
good.
And if you do this show with Naomi Klein, and we do get it on YouTube, we can start this as a platform for a dialogue with a lot of other people. I think the very important thing that needs to be done, like you say, with love, we have to address the hatred that people have for the moneyed class, because it's there. Just like I've told people here in New York, Jewish and non-Jewish, there is anti-Semitism in the country. Even if you think it's ridiculous and ill-founded, like one very talented artist, he was laughing about it. He said, I'm picking up my check from the international Jewish community. And it's a joke. But the thing is, there are people in deep ignorance that don't understand this. And we have to, if we want to create a media that's going to be connecting people, we have to deal with those illusions and keep working at it.
Well,
So-
yeah. I
so
mean,
what you're talking
I don't
about
quite know
is-
where the anti-Semitism comes in. I've never been able to understand
Well,
anti-Semitism.
look at the person on YouTube today who said, I will never consider the Hawks, I don't want to consider the fox hunt. And I had to gently say, have you even looked at the video? Because I don't think the wealthy know how to divest themselves of this enormous wealth in such a way that can make a meaningful difference. What Webster Tarpley said is, the oligarchs don't want to look foolish to each other. I talked to one lady who was selling art, and she said, in selling art, the people who come in have the money to buy it, but they don't want to take a risk spending money on a painting that their friends will then say is bad taste. So there's very much this, we have an artist here at the switcher who has a feeling for that comment, but this is a very real aspect. We all have our image in the 9/11 truth movement. Those that believe in TV fakery and those that say not. There's an image running about if your group will include you, if your group is going to exclude you. And I think that's something that has to be taken into consideration.
I guess so. Yeah, that's all there. And then, for whatever it's worth, you can argue about the nature of the universe and all that sort of thing. And here we've got a telescope that's going to take this a picture of the shock wave of the Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago. They've got one that takes it within about 200,000 years. It's interesting, about the same time we've appeared in evolution on this planet, of the shock wave 13.7 billion, the WHAM it's called. Within about 200,000 years after the shock wave, and they're going to have a telescope by 2011 that will take a picture of the shock wave of the Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago, give a picture of that, take the measure of the universe within a nanosecond of its creation 13.7 billion years ago. That's a pretty sophisticated ability of us to take the measure of things, this consciousness that is unique to the human species.
There's scientists that I've admired thanks to John Cheshire. He's given me an inroad into that may feel differently.
You keep talking. Okay. I'm going to see who this is. It may be something relevant to business. You just keep talking about John Cheshire. Oh.
Okay.
Hello.
What I was trying to explain to Harold is John Cheshire.
Yeah, George,
Senior
we're just finishing up taping a program. Can you hear me?
There's a professor.
You know, we're 2 to 6.
Aspen in England.
Well, okay.
Maybe I better just be quiet.
Okay, good. And Paul's coming with me, and Joshua's coming. But we're 2 to 6.
Can we pause this?
I got you. Okay, there'll be somebody that'll pick up. Okay. So we're taping a program. All right.
No, it won't. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
What I was trying to say was that John Cheshire Senior called to my attention there is a scientist in
Just push
England.
record, Maggie.
Oh, you want to hit record there? We've got 2 tapes running here. There's a scientist in England, Aspen, who got a PhD from Cambridge, and he has a completely different paradigm that's ether-based. And as little as I know about science, I told John Cheshire Senior, who went to school with George Bush at Yale, that an ether-based understanding was ridiculed. So I was really surprised, and John said, yeah, you know, that's true. This was ridiculed. But quantum mechanics and Einstein could not explain the unified field. Einstein went to his death not able to unify the field.
He never was able to deal with gravity.
What I'm hoping is that you will have as a guest on your show John Cheshire Jr. And John Cheshire Jr. was a producer of a video documentary called Mystery of the Sphinx, which got an Emmy for research in 1993.
Okay.
And it talks about redating the Sphinx with water erosion.
Yeah.
And thus coming up with a very different outlook about our history.
About Egyptology,
About Egyptology, and then along with it, many other things will shift. So it's a wonderful show you've got, Harold, and you can invite so many exciting guests on that can give people pause to reflect.
I saw that program you did with John Cheshire. It was very good because he went into, you know, the strong force, weak force, and then gravity and electromagnetic energy. And Einstein was trying to come up with a unified field theory and all of that. They haven't quite been able to come up with it. And things are, we're taking the measure of things. I mean, just think where we've come. I say, think about next year. I say to you, think a year ahead. You think 100 years back, we didn't have electricity.
But that's what I mean about taking the measure of things. Quantum mechanics always stood on the fact that the data that came in, the measurements that came in, were accurate. They said that's why it's so. And yet this Aspen, upon trusting that was the case, skipped to chapter 14 in one book and said, well, they must have explained it in the earlier chapters, and when he went to the earlier chapters, it was wrong. So if it's not taking the measure of things, we should be able to perfect our theories. We should allow peer review. We should make sure that all viewpoints have equal access to be expressed and to be reviewed by those who have dedicated themselves more than you or I. And I think we can raise our viewers up to that, Harold.
Well,
we can get our viewers to say, yes, have the peer review, publish these, even if the theory's wrong, allow it to be aired so so it can be reviewed. But if you don't publish it, it never sees the light of day, and you never know that you may have a more workable theory that will allow us to go into the new reality.
yeah, well, that's true. You want to have that. Then what you want to be able to do is pick out patterns that can be seen. There are certain generalized patterns you can get, and we want to get at an understanding of what the reality is and so forth. Like, for instance, Mr. Einstein, who was a genius, he came up with a theory, or he came up with a little formula, E equals mc squared. That summarizes a whole lot of thinking. He had come up with special theory of relativity in 1905.
Promise me you're going to have John Cheshire Sr.
I
on
should
the
like.
show.
I would like to talk to
He
to
comes
anyone.
here once a year to Manhattan.
Fine, I would like to. Sure.
And if he doesn't, maybe before then we could do a. He doesn't. He's not on the computer, so you can't do Skype with him.
Well, put
But
me
we
in
could
touch.
get a speakerphone, and you could converse with him that way.
Would
because
like to. I would be
you
interested
will
in
have
talking
a
to him.
wonderful energy.
Yeah, I
with
would
him.
be interested in talking to him. But back again to this thing that I'm concerned with, apart from the structure of the universe and all of that, because I go along with Bucky Fuller, and he assumes that he assumes a priori mystery, and he sees things synergistically. And synergy, he wrote this magnus opus called Synergetics, and synergy is the behavior of systems unpredicted by the sum of its parts. There's something more than the sum of the parts of, let's just say, a maximally engaged system. If we get to a point where there is a liberated humanity, and people are not scurrying around like they have to do now to survive and so forth, but they're able to let's say each human being, we're going to get to 10 billion, probably about 2020, and each human being, instead of worrying around about scurrying, how am I going to pay the rent, how am I going to get this, and they keep these systems, and you allow for the full biography of every human being within an ecological context, with the creatures and so forth, and then you get to a point where there is and they're realizing their full potentiality. They can't even realize their biography, let alone their full potentiality. How can a woman be realizing their full potential?
I'm here.
How can they realize that if they're wondering which of the kids they're going to let starve and so forth? They don't need, okay, so if you get to that point, there will be a synergistic resonancy that will inter-accommodate us to universe, like in a speciation sense. There was Australopithecine, and then we get to the point where humanity appears, and then there will be a relationship to the broader cosmos transcendent to our understanding that we've had for 200,000 years. And we cannot know what that relationship to the broader levels of consciousness are until we leave the womb that we are now in. We're being tested on whether or not we will be able to realize that collective whole synergistic resonancy of a liberated humanity within an ecological context. And if we do, it will introduce us to another level of understanding in the evolution of consciousness if we make that transition. But we do not know what that is, and that will introduce us into a further level of a priori synergistic resonancy beyond that. So we don't have fundamentalist, absolutist things. We can get certain principles and so forth, but that we could make that transition is what we're being tested in terms of now. And back to that idea of Mr. Einstein, Mr. Fuller presents this idea. There are others. This idea of transcending scarcity, because that is something that is not theoretical or just theoretical, but it ties into physics and so forth. But it's something that has great practical application in terms of our political and real context by which things are organized. And he had a chart where he showed the trending out of world game of the haves and have-nots on a world scale, a very simplistic thing where you present a thing like E equals mc squared. That encompasses a great deal of understanding in terms of that. And he said that we crossed the line where there were more haves and have-nots in terms of our capability about the year 1970, the same year that we crossed the line where the weapons were able to destroy our whole species. That is like E equals mc squared. That transformation is on that order in terms of our political organization, our sociological organization, our institutions, our architecture. Everything is formulated within a context that has been qualitatively changed in terms of our extended capability. And again, I come back to the fact that chart, I would submit, or the one that is comparable to it, that question, like E equals MC squared, should be presented on every think tank in the world 20 feet high. Is that possible? Because if it is, it creates a context that makes possible things that seem impossible if you stick to the paradigm of which we're leaving. That's just one of the points I would want to make, and that's what frustrates me, that it's never, ever mentioned by anyone. No political candidate. You would have to have entirely new institutional structures, entirely new political structures. The whole basis of all our political organization, our educational systems, everything would have to be qualitatively transformed, and it's very inconvenient people who are locked into thought patterns, ways of thought that we've inherited out of history, which has been transcended.
But how do we shed those thoughts?
Well, you present an alternative. One of the attractive things about that idea is that if that is the case, it gives certain kinds of possibilities that haven't been available to us in the past. In the past, when there wasn't enough, in order for leader A to get enough of the grain which there wasn't enough of for his tribe, he had to kill the other tribe, attack them, take it, steal it. Whatever you had to do, only the paranoid survive, that kind of thing, or the business model, everything. It's all based on that. Whereas if you have, so that the dialectic then would be, if you've got people who are in control of a system that is dysfunctional or is not working, can't work, does not have within it the context that the future requires, you need a new thing, then the only way you can do that is you have to...
Dump cargo.
You have to, no, you have to, like in the case of France, in the coming out of 1,000 years of the feudal system, they had a system in order where people got their identity, the feudal system, and that's what's happened.
They chopped their heads off.
They had to make a revolution informed from the Scottish Enlightenment and from the United States, a bunch of bumpkins across the ocean. They had an old order. They called that order the ancient regime. It was a system in place that was for the ages in terms of that thinking. They did that, and what they did is they made a revolution from Les Miserables, and they cut off Louis XVI's head because they represented the bad guys who were causing that. They did the same thing in 1917 Russia.
So we
they
don't
had
want,
to do
so
away
we don't
with
want to do that.
No,
That's an old paradigm. We know
well,
that does not work. Like
no.
even Webster says you've always got rule of the one, the few, and the many.
All right, yeah, you
and
had
he
an
said
emperor.
if you get rid of some of the few, you're going to have other few come about.
Somebody else comes
so
in and takes over.
we're talking about a new reality.
Yeah, that's right, wouldn't it? Well, there's no bigger reality that is practical, not apart from theoretical,
but it's not going to be
than
punishment.
Transcending scarcity.
But it's not
transcending scarcity. Transcending scarcity as a reality simply has to come onto the thing, because everything would follow from that in terms of the transformations that would be possible. And you would be able to have a qualitative transformation, and I think this is the biggest challenge for people in public access or progressives or people who are concerned with liberating people rather than enslaving them and so forth. There are differences of that. Rather than identifying the faults of the system in place or the thinking of the people in place within a context where you're going to be able to eliminate those bad guys, put the good guys in, and that sort of thing, you're going to have a system that's so comprehensively appropriate to the evolution of consciousness that it will be able to be liberating of the masses of humanity, the 80% that are not served and will not be served within the context we've inherited, liberating of them within an ecological context of the creatures and so forth. But the biggest challenge of all is to have some kind of a context where that will be able, that system will not only be liberating of the masses who have been enslaved. We had chattel slavery.
Yes.
Women couldn't vote. All these things out of history. Okay, all these prejudices and things like that.
What about being burned at the stake? That's not a good one either.
Burned at the stake wasn't very pleasant, but they had these kind of things. But then you're going to have to, the tricky thing is you're going to have a system that's so comprehensively appropriate that it will be able to be understood by those responsible for the historically inherited institutions, the bad guys, in the progressive context, understood by them in the end. But understand, they are not the leaders of this because they are being well served by that. They're more ensconced within those institutions. The more ensconced you are successfully in a gated community with Lamborghinis and all that kind of thing, the less you're able to see it. But they are going to be included on their own terms, as would each part of our consciousness. Each individual part of that will be on their own terms in a liberated sense, but they will be the last to see it. They are not the leaders. The leaders are not contained within the institutions.
Why would they be the last?
Because
think
they
they'll
are
be the
more
last or the
ensconced within the institutions that give them favor.
I don't know if they're going to be the last or the first. I think we're all in this together. I think we
Well,
all grow
ultimately
together.
that is the case, yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, because I've seen people who are homeless and if you really, you know, kind of go into the thinking, it seems this is a waking up process. We have to wake up to our power, and those who've been on the short end of things
Yeah, but we don't want to wake
have
up
to overcome their bitterness,
Yeah,
have to
but-
overcome their victimization.
Well,
Not to say you don't help them, but what I'm thinking is in the same way we may hesitate to give somebody who's homeless on the street $1 because we think they're just going to go out and buy some alcohol, maybe some people think the same about us. What's the use to help us with our public access show because we're, you know, espousing impossible ideas and they're not practical, and maybe at the most or at the worst we even waste people's time. You know, they shouldn't even be considering these ridiculous things.
Right.
That's when Nico Haupt was kind of leaning on you saying, I don't want to just do talk. But what was great about you, you hung in there with him, and everything that he brought up, you could play with it. You were
We're at
there was
MNN,
a nice
so-
back and
I feel
forth
good about
between
that,
you.
huh,
Was
man?
there?
You
I like
feel good
Nico.
about
I like
that? Well,
everybody.
I
so, you
know.
know. And
I
the
know.
thing is,
Well, you work with any.
Oh, well,
everyone.
we'll have to see
Yeah,
what
but
we
when
got.
you're talking about
Okay,
the
now
people
what
who,
we gotta
like
do
in
is
the
strike
Les
the set.
Miserables France,
Maybe they didn't want to hear all kind of sweet talk about those people who have been so oppressive of them. They wanted to kill them.
Right.
They wanted to kill them. They
Yeah.
wanted to make a revolution. That's the kind
But that
of thing.
didn't work, did it?
No, well, it
That
did.
didn't
I
work.
mean, it brought some changes. That's been the
I don't know if that's what
been
brought the change,
dialectic.
Harold.
That's been the dialectic advancement of human institutions, and we've gotten to the point now that the system in place that the United States of America, with its neoliberalism and so forth, is trying to impose on the world is an ancient regime. 230 years old. We'll talk about the
Tell me
Constitution.
ancient again.
It means ancient system. Ancient regime, ancient regime.
Oh.
It's legitimate, and they claim it's legitimate historically. We represent legitimacy, and the other people, the barbarians, are some sort of a force that has to be whipped into shape or something. Was
Right.
part of the colonialism. But the trick is to have a thing where you understand those people responsible for those institutions are involved in the same system. They're part of the same system, but you don't get your leadership from them. It's not going to come from them. It's going to come from things like further down the rabbit hole, or things that are in touch with the people, but the people have to get into a pattern where they're being
But-
comprehensively able to be inclusive of everybody, because everybody's got to be involved in that new transformation. But the leaders, so-called leaders, political, business, or stars, or celebrities, or however that thing is asserted, they are not the leaders. It's got to have to be something tucked into the mass, but the mass is going to have to include them. So you're beyond the dialectic
I think-
necessity of cutting off the head
No.
of the people responsible for an outdated institutional structure.
I think everybody has to do what they can. I
No.
mean, I think, you know, somebody who has $1 has to take a risk that the beggar will be constructive with it. And likewise, the beggar, you know, has to realize that he needs to pull himself together to make the connection. And I think a lot of people realize this. I realize it. I have to exert myself to polish my product, to make it better. If anything that's successful about Farther Down the Rabbit Hole is from the viewers, it's from the comments, it's from the energy. You could call it blessings. It's from the support. Some people, I've had a guy who was a Green Hornet in Vietnam. He said, "Oh my God, I admire your courage. If I said what I knew flying around in the helicopter in Vietnam, the CIA would come after me, and I have grandchildren, and I could never speak it out."
Right.
And I couldn't convince him that exactly speaking it out is what will help. Because when Nico Haupt called up those weapons companies, I felt that the people answering, now you could say they were just public relations people, so they weren't sincere, and all they want to do is be stingy and hold on to their money and kill more people. But I don't think so. I think they were human beings just as much as you and me, as the rest of the viewers, as
Yeah, they
people
could be
whose
susceptible
money
to
market accountant
yeah.
people are saying, you can't make that investment, you'll never make any money,
Yeah.
socially responsible doesn't make any sense. I think they want to change. I think it's going to come from everywhere.
Well, okay,
From
fine. I
everywhere.
think so. Possibly you're right. Possibly you're right. But I just think the
And I'm glad
progressive...
Nico made the attempt.
Well,
I'm glad
Nico-
he made those phone
Yeah, well,
calls.
Nico's
I
very
got the
concerned.
numbers. I'm going to call him back.
Right, Nico's very good, particularly in terms of showing the Promethean destructive capability of new weapon systems for destruction and for intimidation of keeping the people in line. But realize the leaders throughout history have had to keep the people in line by overt force, by police, by military. They keep them in force, and then when they can't do it by force, they do it with ideas and co-opting and psychology and all the manipulation and that sort of thing. But the thing,
you're back to reward punishment.
Well, you're back to reward punishment. You're going to have reward punishment, you know, like behavioral psychology. You're running through a maze, and you can hit here, you can, and you can direct everybody. The advertising industry, all of these kind of things that keep the system going. But then the thing is, they are going to be included. That's the thing is, you want the progressives that are going to be really effective, rather than trying to eliminate the bad guys, is to realize they're involved, but then hoist them on their own petard, as it were, and to bring a challenge that they will, because they have a sense of responsibility. A lot of those people in those positions of institutions have a responsibility to make sure the lights go on. And they don't want to hear some anarchistic nonsense about somebody saying everybody be good or something. They've got to have something practical that they can latch on to. We've got to be able to present that to them in a maybe distant way. But they're not the leaders. They don't have the system that is for the eternal ages. There has to be a qualitative transformation. It's going to come from the people. Okay, it's going to come from the things like Nico's doing and you're doing and we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I picked up a comment today. Someone said, I mean, it wasn't said to me directly, that Webster Tarpley said, I'm down an unacceptable path.
Yes, right.
But
yeah, we're heading for disaster.
I think, no, me personally.
Oh, you.
By taking this risk with Nico, by trying to do programming that's more effective, that gets out of the endless philosophical speculations, it's a kind of experiment. It's a type of artwork.
Yeah.
You know what we're doing. You know,
it's like
we're
modeling.
working with the tools. It's like the sum is greater than the parts. I brought a few wires with me today, and you had this system partly in place.
Well,
we put it together. We couldn't quite get the stream going.
We will.
But
we
got a
we'll
sum greater, and I feel the energy.
Maggie's here doing the mixing.
I know. But I feel kind of, you know, looking into the future. There will be some viewers out there who, in a low moment, will say, Paula, keep going. You may be unacceptable to others.
And here comes Jackson, the dog. Jackson's putting in his 2 cents worth. He's willing to do it. Well, it's really good. I'm glad we couldn't get the stream. I'm sorry we couldn't get the streaming going. We will. Think a year out. Think even a week out or something. We may be advancing. And things are going well. There's a lot of signs for thinking positive. And public access is something to be encouraged very much. I don't know if you can lift him up. He's kind of a handful. She's trying to lift up Jackson.
Mrs.
There.
Hannum,
now you want to get there's Jackson. And his
Mrs. Hannum loves the hounds.
Yes, right.
Mrs. Hannum and the hounds. You're going to see Mrs. Nancy Hannum, the great grandniece of Avril Harriman.
Yes, I saw it.
Week.
Oh, on further down the rabbit hole. Okay, now that's something that's worth doing. So thank you very much for viewing. Hope this comes out.
Reach out for animal rights too.
And we'll reach. Yeah, absolutely. Animal rights, the creatures. Everybody has to be involved in it, including not only the creatures, but also the people responsible for those outdated historically institutions that we're going to be able to help transform in a way that they'll be able to go along with in the end. But that's it for now. See you next week. Thanks for coming in. Always good talking to Paula Gloria.
Yes.
Thank you for viewing. We'll be coming back
Thank you,
tomorrow.
Jackson.
Thank you, Jackson. Thank you. We have to rush off and do another couple programs over at MNN.
Yes, that was. I feel good about that, huh, Maggie?
You feel good about that? Well, we'll see.
I mean.
Oh well, that
but
glitch. We'll have to see what we got. Okay, now what we've got to do is strike the set.
Okay.
Maybe